so one of the next steps, or one of the last steps that I have to do before teardown for the mock-up process actually, is addressing this rear spring. Now, if you've been following along, you noticed even in episode 1, this thing already had this particular shock on it. It was already monoshocked. Well, whenever I did that, I didn't have the subframe built. So I wasn't able to see about how everything was going to lay out. And it was a little bit more difficult to picture the tire clearance here, especially since before I had the stock Comstar on it. It was a 16-inch, so this tire's taller. It puts it closer to here. And anyway, with the rider on it, this is just, it's too close. And this is with a lot of preload in the spring right now. So one thing I want to do is raise this lower mount, raise the mounting point up probably about a ½ inch higher or so. And that way, this height is what I'll be shooting after with the rider on it. So unsprung, without sag or rider sag in the rear suspension, it will sit up a little higher, but that'll be totally fine. It'll be like any other bike. But yeah, when I take preload out of the spring, it sinks down too far, and that's not how it should be. So instead of just using preload to try to overcome an issue, I want to do it the right way. And have just a little bit of preload in the spring, but set up with the right length and mounting points. So I definitely don't want to tear up or redo the upper mount, because there's so much built into that one. So the lower mount, luckily, at this point is still just a couple simplified tabs. So that's what I'm working on now. Do some more research, take some measurements of the spring, unsprung, sprung, lengths, and we'll get somebody on here to simulate the rider weight. We'll measure the sag, and then hopefully I'll get a dimension to raise the rear mount, and we'll go from there. Good morning. So as you saw, I've been talking about messing with or modifying this lower mount. So today we're going to do a little bit of math on calculating spring rate, sag, preload, all that stuff. So I've got my handy dandy Racetech suspension Bible here. Has all the good information in it. And right now I'm going to work on an initial just kind of base preload adjustment, and I'm going to reinstall the spring, and then I'm going to remeasure my sag with and without rider. So you guys will be in for a treat. We'll get my girlfriend in here, and she's going to act as the rider. We're going to load her down with some weight, and yeah, it's going to be fun. So she's going to hate it. Okay, so right now I'm working on measuring my rear sag basically, and this is with 0 preload. So I'm measuring the same point each time from like an axle center line to the closest point on the electronics tray. So my measurement point is from the upper rib of this tire to there, and so that's going to be consistent measurement. So right now I'm just going through that process. So right now it's with 0 preload built into the spring. I've already calculated my installed height, and right now this is full. This is just sag with no preload in it. I'm going to go ahead and raise the bike back up. I'll build in, say, 10 millimeters of preload to the spring, and we'll remeasure. We're going to try to create a chart or something here. My measurement point is going to be taken, or my neutral point is going to be taken where I can slide these bolts out. So my spring is 177 millimeters high or tall, so I'm going to go ahead and crank in, let's say, just to start we could do even 5 millimeters and see what kind of difference we get. So we'll see if we can compress it 5 millimeters. Well, that was a really good guess. There's 5. Alright. Do it consistent. This should be our same measurement here. 146. Yep. Lower the bike down. We're looking for the change right here. So 111 millimeters on that. Just keep going. Raise it back up. All right. Now I can probably get the simulated rider up here, and we'll just remeasure probably for each of those points. So we'll probably start at this point, and it's easier to back it off again. Just save my hands. Yeah. Have the camera.
No! Oh, I would have done my hair.
This is Amber.
Eh.
She's our test subject for today. So I have about 40 pounds in the backpack, so we're gonna get this just kind of ballparking, matching rider weight. Anyway, this is at a neutral position. I have still 15 millimeters of preload in the spring, so I'm gonna go ahead and lower this thing down and check the sag on this. Doing great.
Thanks.
Alright, we're not even going to bother with the 5 mil. Alright, you are safe to get down.
I may dismount.
You may dismount. Can you hand me the backpack? You could really call it a book bag right now. Thank you, test subject. Say bye. So you can see by the compression of the suspension there, that's why I need that's why I need to actually raise up the mount. So we need to have more of a clearance there with the tire with the rider weight on the bike, and we don't want to just try to fix that or put a band-aid on it. It's not a correct fix by just adding preload. So I'm going to do some calculations and try to come up with a distance to raise that shock mount. So that's what I'll be working on now. We're going to look at all of our data points, and I'll fill some more in there, and then that's what we use to hopefully get a distance. Okay, let's see if I can talk my way through this one. So you saw me taking all the measurements with different like free sag and partial sag measurements, and with the reading I've done, just a general ballpark for this type of bike or this type of setup should be about 35 millimeters of rear sag, and I'm measuring by this. So right now I have too much rear sag in it, and that's putting the tail too close to the tire. And I had talked about moving this pivot point or this mounting point for the shock upwards. So I've tried to determine if I had let's say a stiffer spring in the bike with a certain amount of preload, that I could get away with, like it would move that 35 millimeters or so. Now I'm pretty confident I will have to get a different spring, a stiffer one, So I'm trying to take into account that being like if I had, like let's say a 900 inch pound, or pounds per inch. If I had a 900 pound, that I could get it within that window on the sag. But for me to do that first, I think I really do need to move the pivot point up. So I've determined through those measurements, through things I've been writing down, I've determined that I probably need to move this up about 10 millimeters. And I think that'll get me within that operating window to where I can adjust and fine tune like preload and whatnot to get it right where it needs to be. Because what I have it set up for right now is about 10 millimeters longer than the actual shock is right now. And I just did that with a bar in place of it. And this is where I would want the bike to sit unloaded without rider, or maybe just ever so slightly down because of the weight of the bike would cause some natural sag to happen or some free sag. So what I want to do is look into either if I can modify the Ducati shock that I currently have, that would be great. Looking at maybe like an offset or an eccentric type bushing, because if I can get away with 5 mils on either end, there's my 10. If not, I will have to remake this part. So not that big of a deal, but if I can avoid hacking up my my mounts I've already made and re-welding, that that would be pretty cool. So yeah, that's what I'm gonna go for now. I'm gonna give a call to Racetech and see if maybe I can just talk through it with them, and maybe they'd have a different suggestion. Maybe there's a whole different end I can put onto the shock assembly that'll give me that 10 mil. So we'll see. But that's where I'm at now, and I think we're gonna get there. Okay, so I think I've got this figured out. Yet again, I've been drinking a lot of coffee, I'm a little wired, and I think I'm onto it. So. Anyway, I was doing some plotting points, and I wanted to do before I did any cutting or anything like that. I wanted to confirm how much travel my measurement here was versus or compared to the eye to eye to get that kind of ratio of motion. So I want to have, with the bike unloaded, no rider, I want to have about 5 millimeters of sag. And then from there with rider, it should turn into approximately about 35. Hopefully, just ballparking. There's no exact right number. So I need to, instead of, I can't get a different shock, so I need to build it around the shock. And I'd originally designed it a little too short, so it put the wheel too high. Anyway, I've built in 5 millimeters higher than where I want the bike to sit to account for that sag. And I've gone ahead and I've compared and I've measured the length here. So this is a 333 millimeter eye-to-eye post that I've made. This simulates the shock I have. So I went ahead and I just mounted it to the side. I bring it up in line with my hole here, and then I have my mark. So that mark is going to tell me how far I need to bring the shock pivot up. So I'm going to go ahead and measure that, and that should be my winning number. And then we will go ahead and cut a new template, and we'll go from there. so we've got the lower shock mount all cut off, swing arms mounted again, and then we're ready to re-mock up this lower mount. So I had talked about moving the pivot point up 11 millimeters, but it's not really a necessity in this sense. So this is at the ride height it used to be whenever the shock was unloaded, or was mocked up like just regular shock length. That's kind of where it would have put that. So this is my measurement here. This is 145 millimeters, and what I'm going to shoot for is 100 and 180, and then with the correct preload that we've already measured on how this compresses, if I set this at 180, this should be in the ballpark at a 5 millimeter compression, putting me at 175, and then from there, with the rider on it, I might get another about 35 millimeters of sag, which is going to end up in around this ballpark, maybe a little bit tighter. So hopefully this is approximately a little higher than what ride height would be with rider. And then I can base my geometry off that. So now I'm going to go ahead and crank up on the jack here. You can see that moving in as it's getting drawn further and further away. Okay, I'll do my measurement by the same method here. I'm going from the axle center line to a specific point with a mark here, if you can see. So axle center line to my specific mark. Right now that's about 167 or so. So we're going to keep going, and notice the pivot there is getting pushed forward, and we're going to do something about that. Alright, we are actually right at 180. I'm going to crank it up just a hair. Alright, so I've been trying to use the same measurements every time to the rib of this, to that, in the same line. So this is where I'm going to mock the bike up and actually do a lower shock mount with no compression in the shock like this. Now I don't want to put it just straight to the front. I want to try to keep it in the previous line that it was. So the old tab I have, I know this front corner was parallel with the front of this, so if I bring this back, you know, it raises it higher. That front pivot, as long as I keep it with this line here, that should be the original angle, because if you change the angle, it changes the geometry. So I want to try to keep that plane, so I want to build it back like that. So about like that. You can see then it would be about 11 millimeters higher up. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to space out the shock. I'll pause this real quick. I'll space out the shock, kind of get it mocked up how I want, and then we'll go over the lower mount. Alright, so we've got our tabs made here. Should be a lot more beefy. I actually built these out of 1/4 inch this time instead of 3/16, and the reason for that is I'm going to space these out a little bit further. So I want to have a little bit more rigidity in that. So I'm going to go ahead and assemble this. And I've got it, yeah, as you saw in the time lapse, I took a lot of time to just get these things dialed in and fitting absolutely perfect. And then what you can't see up top is I actually have a washer in the shock to keep it squared like this. All right. And I'm just going to look at this from the back, make sure it's square. Everything should fit fine, and I'll go ahead and start tacking it up. We'll have a nice setup here. Right. That fits really, really nice. I'm going to tighten this up, try to get it locked down. A little bit more snug. You can see it can kind of curve around. We want to get it right in the center. Right there. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and get it tacked. Check it out, here we go. Got those lower brackets made. Moves that pivot up about 11 millimeters. All else looks the same, but we have the clearance needed, and we have the preload on the spring. I can sit on it, you'll see, and this thing acts correct. So we have our stance. We can get our geometry dialed in. I think this thing's gonna be so rad. I can't wait to ride it. Slight clearance issue.
It's gonna take a bit of work. Oh, now that you're here. Whoa,
I think that's gonna be perfect.
people come and go.
Now I have 15 millimeters of preload into this the spring that we have been using, and I feel like that's probably a little bit excessive. So I'm thinking I might still have to step the spring up maybe like another 50 pounds per inch. So that would put me at a 900, and I think that might be about perfect. And I might be able to get away with, let's say, that spring with just slightly less preload. But overall, I'm right, I think, where I need to be. So I did, you saw me bouncing on this thing and doing some measurements and pulling it down, letting it come back up, checking that sag. I'm about 3 millimeters off of where I was hopefully going to be on the dimension here. So this comes out to like 171 or something, 172. I was shooting for 175. So yeah, I think it's gonna be great. That made a huge difference, just about 11 millimeters on down here, and that's what it needed. But I did this again just because I mocked the bike up without any of the subframe built. I didn't know where my clearance is going to be, and this is looking good now. So I like a little bit of the rake, just a little bit of an aggressive stance. So now I can actually go ahead and I'm going to recheck the trail and everything in the front, and just kind of write everything down, and we'll get an idea of the geometry of the bike. So, but I hope you guys kind of enjoyed this video, and I think it's a good look into maybe what it takes to go that extra mile, that extra step. Because this is some safety stuff. You want the bike to handle good, you want things to perform well, and you want it to be strong and of high quality. So anyway, yeah, I can't wait to ride this thing.